So Emily, thanks so much for hopping on here with me. I know we've all been very excited to talk about the manufacturing productivity and pressure index that the team recently put out. You've been front and center in developing a lot of the blogs that we're producing off of that. You've really had a chance to dive in to all the learnings that we've made. And I'm super excited to be talking to you about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think these are really fascinating findings. A lot of things that I didn't expect to be so impactful. We've had an opportunity to really dig out and take a look at.
Yeah, yeah. That's what happens when you bring together hundreds of CEOs to give their insights. But there's a lot of findings in there for us to discuss. So I want to dive in and ask you some questions about just a few of them to get started. One of the first things, though, that hopped out to me before we really get into CEO pain is that across the broad swath of problems that we're going to discuss, all of them were essentially exacerbated by the lack of good data that teams could utilize. And we've called that data gaps, but I'm wondering if you can clarify for us what we really mean there.
Yeah, so a data gap is just a term we found very helpful in illustrating a phenomenon that's like very, very common in a lot of manufacturing companies and companies in all industries, really. I think the best way to think of a data gap is to consider how you expect the flow of information to happen in your company. You probably have a lot of systems that are working great on paper. You know, on paper, system A talks to system B, they have a linked database in system C, and anything you might need is available for you to find it. But in practice, we find that this is a lot more dysfunctional, disjointed, and incomplete than people expect. These data gaps are caused metaphorically by things just kind of falling off the conveyor belt between two systems, or someone being in too much of a hurry to properly classify something, properly label data, or even input it at all into the system. And what we found is that no matter how confident you feel that your systems are set up in this kind of productive, insightful way, there's always going to be way more holes and disappearances and incompleteness than you expect.
Yeah, I think the falling off the conveyor belt metaphor is a pretty apt one for this industry. That also reflects a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from not just CEOs and senior leaders, but a lot of IT operations folks. A big part of this problem is the fact that the software ecosystem, the tools that we as an industry have adopted to help us digitize, they don't play real nice together. So I wonder what you think about that as a component of the problem.
Absolutely. We run into a lot of situations where people are eager to make some sort of advancement or change in their digital systems. They adopt new software and new standards and practices that, again, on paper, seem like they're going to solve a lot of problems and drive a lot of efficiency. But with every adoption, there's often some data that is either wholly left behind or requires a lot of manual work to convert to make compatible. And it creates situations where you kind of develop a trust that, oh, well, we didn't delete that old data. It still exists somewhere. You just have to kind of cross-reference with this old system. Or in the most extreme cases, well, it's still sitting in those filing cabinets up in, Buddy's office over there. If you have the time, you can surely dig it out. The problem is that nobody has that time. And often people don't even know that they ought to be looking for this stuff. So this creates like a functional data gap where even if there is some compatibility, some manual cross-referencing you can do, if it's not fast and it's not consistent, it doesn't really solve the problem, and it's just as bad as the data not existing in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think one of the first conversations that I had when I joined CADDi with a customer CEO, he said something to me to the effect of, we've made such big investments in all these other software tools, but all we've really managed to do is take our data silos from the file cabinet to the cloud. So that line, it still resonates in my head all the time. And to the gentleman in question, if you're ever in need of a job, I've got a copywriting gig for you. But no, jokes aside, so help us understand the implications of data gaps for manufacturers. There are a lot of problems that we identified in the research report, and you've gotten to get your hands in to many of them and sort of articulate for people how they manifest. So share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, let me start by throwing a stat at you that may at first not seem to be directly related, but actually really speaks to the prevalence of data gaps. We found that 60% of procurement professionals have sourced a part that they knew was a higher price than a cheaper deal than they could have gotten. And 71% of sales professionals have quote or sold an unprofitable deal, again, knowingly. And what
That's
that says to me,
70%. The 70% is just such an intense number.
mhm.
That's a lot of unprofitable work. It's hard to imagine that is going unnoticed by manufacturers.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the thing is, like, this shows me that people are aware that they are making decisions that are less informed than they ought to be, that there's information that they know that they're lacking, a known unknown of data. And to me, that says two things. First, it means that even if you know what you're looking for, actually finding it quickly enough and consistently enough is that hard a problem. Like, what is in place to do those things isn't sufficient. And that's also backed up by our statistical findings. We found that the majority of engineers, procurement people, salespeople are spending hours every day just trying to track down information they need to do their jobs. The other thing that tells me is that this 70% number is actually an underestimation. Because for every time you knowingly make a decision and say, well, I just don't have time to find the correct answer, so I'm going with the good enough answer, there's going to be 10 times as many situations where you don't even know what you don't know. And that's the sort of insights that I think we need to start proactively surfacing to cover the true data gaps.
Yeah, yeah, that is a really interesting thing to think about. Right, in our findings, like seven out of 10 people in sales are saying, I at one point in time have made this this faux pas, or I've made the choice to quote work that I thought was likely to be unprofitable. If 7 out of 10 people are willing to admit it, can we just generalize to 100% of people? Have, like, the other 30% maybe just lack the self-awareness to understand, or the call it the intestinal fortitude to admit that this is a real problem for them. That is a scary one. There's another stat from the procurement side of the house that I also found particularly interesting, that the majority of the folks that we surveyed from the procurement side of the house said with new suppliers, they were sending back product or were essentially having to resource parts 50% of the time when they tried to bring on a new supplier, because those didn't meet the engineering spec required, which is another almost impossible thing for me to fathom, given the importance of lead time in the manufacturing process, and how dependent also the production of a major assembly or like final product is on the successful delivery of component parts. I find it hard to imagine that the industry could sustain itself with a 50% success rate. What does that say to you about how manufacturers in the US are operating right now?
It's a very chilling figure, to be sure. And it's certainly one that, no company, no individual would ever willingly step into, right? So to me, that speaks to time crunches, insane time sensitivity, prioritization of speed to market, which are all necessary things, but they exacerbate the impact of data gaps. So in the example you gave, what it comes down to in most situations is that there was some sort of miscommunication or misunderstanding or incorrect data supplied between the engineering and procurement departments, right? And that seems, again, it's hard to imagine how that sort of thing would happen. On paper, it should never happen. But when there's a lot of manual work involved, a lot of manual relaying of part numbers and stat sheets and spec sheets, and so many rooms for human error to be introduced, it becomes more and more feasible, this mind-boggling stat that over half these jobs end up having parts that get turned back and having to get resourced. I think, in the end, it's because there's data silos, like we've mentioned before, existing within the procurement and engineering department. Even if you have a conveyor belt that's supposed to be sending this data back and forth and running everything smoothly, stuff is falling off that conveyor belt. People are scrambling around trying to keep stuff on the conveyor belt. People are digging around under shelves and under dusty old bins to try to figure out where that information fell off and managed to get to. These are the kind of unfortunate physical realities. Physical is maybe an odd term, but you know what I mean. The externalities of data management that complicate these situations and lead to such disastrous results.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all easier said than done, I guess. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding myself chuckling a little bit internally, thinking about some of the conversations I just had at IMTS with production engineers. As we say, these things shouldn't happen, and true, they shouldn't, but they quite often do, as is just the reality of trying to coordinate such a complex process. What's the saying? Like, the best laid plans of mice and men.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so I think as we articulate the problem, it's really important for us to maybe offer up some solution, or at least a theory on how folks can go about solving or fixing this problem of major data gaps. And you presented a couple of ideas here, ways that people can approach unifying systems. They can approach interlinking assets. They can approach just trying to create a better, healthier, more democratized data environment. So why don't you share a little bit of that with us?
Absolutely. And I think a healthy perspective is to realize that this is a process that has been happening since the dawn of computing, since fax machines, since everything. More and more, we're building up more robust and fluid and consistent systems of sharing this data. And I think it's very exciting that in the last few years, there has been another significant step forward, which is all in the realm of AI data management and machine learning, machine vision, just new ways of parsing, searching, and interacting with data that's a lot more intuitive, a lot more consistent, and a lot more kind of open-armed in terms of what data it can take in. So to me, I would say there's three major qualities that we need to see from systems in this kind of new era of digital transformation. First is an idea of system agnosticism, where before, you would have a PLM product, an ERP product. If they played nicely together, that was more just a fortunate coincidence. There needed to be some sort of alignment on the way they structured their data, in the way that the databases can mesh with one another. And more often than not, that still required a lot of manual data fixing or cross-referencing, memorizing part numbers that will show up in each system. But then maybe for a third system, you need to memorize a whole other part number. And that's what creates these data gaps, these shortcomings, these things falling off the conveyor belt. This new era of technology is a lot better at being data agnostic. And what that uses is AI technology to parse things that aren't just sort of manually entered or so strict around IDing and labeling. So a system like CADDi, for example, can take a look at a drawing and parse that drawing on the level of what is it a drawing of? Is this a bearing? Is this a pipe fitting? Is this part of an engine? And categorize and link these things across all systems, no matter where it's being fed in from or where it's being analyzed in, simply by parsing it on this most functional, intuitive level, right? If you want to get a wheel well, you know what a wheel well is. You might not know that it's ID H7692. You don't know that it's tagged with WW_metallic, but you can work on this level and still pull in all of the data you need from all of your systems.
So
go ahead.
So there's an interesting thing at play here, right? Which is, we're starting to talk about intelligent systems. In this case, CADDi is using machine learning to start to simulate the expertise of someone who's very tenured in their career in manufacturing, which is a great thing, because obviously one of the major findings in our report is that the industry is still facing a massive skilled labor deficit. So having a system that can supplement the knowledge and the work of your team is pretty powerful. The other thing that's worth saying here is that artificial systems like CADDi are just fundamentally better equipped than the human brain to process such a massive volume of data. Now, of course, a very senior person may have the history in their mind of when they have machined the part that is being looked for, right? So they may be able to, as you pointed out, go to the catalog and find the part number, the part name in question, because they've got a memory of having done that 10 years ago. But when we start to talk about volumes of drawings in the thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands, the human brain is really not well developed or well suited to do the type of pattern recognition that a system like ours can. So when we talk about system agnosticism or intuitive data linking and foregrounding insights, which I think you were going to round around to in a moment, this is what AI was really intended for, and is probably its best use today. So I wonder if you want to expand on that at all.
Absolutely, yeah. I really agree with what you're saying about there are veteran engineers you may have that have, the catalog in the back of their head. But this is, again, a functional data gap. If you notice in your system that you're often relying on knowing somebody in the office that you can guarantee knows this stuff, what happens when that person retires? What happens if they go on vacation? What happens if one day they just up and forget, as the human brain is liable to do? This is still a data gap, even if on paper the data is quote unquote there. So yeah, this is something where we really should rely on AI. I'm a huge advocate of human intuition, human wisdom, but we get the most out of those qualities when we delegate the tasks that AI is good at for AI. And something like cataloging tens of thousands, in some cases even hundreds of thousands of historic drawings is something that AI excels at. Like, I can really not overstate almost how magical it seems to upload a drawing, like a hand-drawn sketch of a part, and see CADDi instantly be able to recognize, parse, and surface all of the similar parts drawings you have in your catalog, even ones that you've scanned in from old on-paper drawings from like decades ago. No human being on the planet would have that quickness or consistency of recall. And it's just really exciting, because this truly is something that wasn't possible until very recently, this sort of bespoke, very detailed and advanced computer vision and image parsing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredible moment, and folks far smarter than me are working on helping make that future a reality. That said, of course, I think my wife might argue that my intelligence is artificial, so maybe I'm not the best suited to be forecasting the future of AI in manufacturing. But Emily, again, all that said, this is a lot of fun. So share with me, next time we come back together, what are we going to be talking about here?
Yeah, so although this aspect of the report was very down on the ground dealing with the day-to-day practitioners and their issues, we also took a look at more high-level economic forecasting, and the results were not necessarily the most optimistic. So we're going to talk about, is a recession on the horizon? Why are so many manufacturers predicting that one is? And what are the smartest manufacturers doing to kind of stay ahead of it and to mitigate the challenges of it? So look forward to that. A very cheerful conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, keeping it light with recession concerns.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to that. So for CADDi, I'm Aaron Lober.
And I'm Emily Arnott.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.